Hello and welcome to our Season of Creation episodes of Prophetic Voices, Preaching and Teaching Beloved Community, a podcast from the Episcopal Church's Office of Reconciliation, Justice, and Creation Care, where we explore the season and the lectionary through the lens of social justice. The Season of Creation is celebrated September 1st through October 4th by Christians around the world. It's a time for renewing, repairing, and restoring our relationship to God, one another, and all of creation. I'm your host, Reverend Shaniqua, Interim Indigenous Missioner, and I'm so glad you could join us. In this episode of Prophetic Voices, we'll be discussing the lectionary for Sunday, September 14th, Proper 19. Our amazing guests this week are the Reverend Jazzy Bostock, who is a kanaka maoli woman serving St. John the Baptist and Maluhia Lutheran Church in Waianae, Hawaii. She and her wife have a small homestead consisting of raised garden beds, some fruit trees, a flock of hens, a hive of bees, and a dog. Their two sons, Theo, 4, who came to them through foster care, and Sam, 2 months, keep joy, laughter, and coffee flowing in their home. The Reverend Dr. Lisa de Silva, who is a professor of wisdom traditions in the San Francisco Bay Area, where she also serves as a spiritual director. The creation of art is her passion, as is deep house music. Lisa was selected to be an Episcopal Church delegate at COP29 in Azerbaijan in 2024. And last but not least, the Reverend Anna Shine serves as a campus minister at Appalachian State University and as the missioner for creation care and social justice at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Boone, part of the Diocese of Western North Carolina. Her deepest passion is to find ways to reconnect people of faith with the rest of God's creation. She loves listening to stories, doing puzzles, making music with others through singing and playing violin, getting her hands dirty in the garden soil, and spending time with her dog Hugo. Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for being willing to be guests on the podcast. It's great to have you all. I know our listeners love hearing from you, and I love hearing from you and hearing from your wisdom. This season of creation's theme is peace with creation. And it could mean like being at peace with creation, but it could also mean bringing peace through creation or by creation. What is your take, and what does it mean to you?
That way that you phrased it, bringing peace through creation or by creation, makes me think of art more broadly. And not that I'm a creative person, I'm not, but that poetry and art can so often sort of challenge our thinking or like rearrange our worldviews in both sort of small and really profound ways. So although that's not like, I'm not a creative in that sense, I'm very appreciative of those people who are creatives in that way. I've been really aware with the sort of government federal cuts to so many art programs, both like in schools and more nationally, what an important role that has in our like in the social fabric of our lives, right? Like what is life without art in it? And I don't necessarily think of all art as bringing peace, because I think quite a lot of good art really challenges us to like see actually where there's discord or where there's violence or where there's something wrong. But in that way sort of reminds me of like prophetic writings, right? That you're called to look at something that's wrong so that you can see it clearly and then be challenged to make it right. I think more generally of peace with creation as like being at peace with the natural world, with the animals and plant beings that surround me. But that bringing peace through creation is an interesting kind of different lens on it that makes me think about human created works.
Yeah, I think for me as a historian, I've got a little bit of a different take on it. When I saw this and I was delighted, peace with creation, because I see it as a consciousness and as also a way of being, a way of human being. It's alluring. It allures us into new human being. And I say that because clearly we've not been at peace with creation. We're at a moment of ecocide, and the meaning of ecocide literally meaning the murder of home. And we're in that moment. It's a cusp moment. But we must remember that, ecocide is not something that was created by putting tons of carbon into the air in the Industrial Revolution. It's from a consciousness that goes way, way back and even predates our tradition, the Christian tradition, in terms of how we use and abuse our natural world. And it's not been very peaceful. That's not been very peaceful. Our Christian tradition is implicated in that. And for me, that's not something we should be afraid to confront. So I We need to face who we are and who we've been to our green-blue jewel of a planet. And I don't see that as something we need to deny or be afraid of. Certainly we can lament it, as Jeremiah does. I think it presents an opportunity for us a developmental opportunity in terms of our maturation as a species, as our coming into human being. So I think there's a lot of hope in this idea of coming into, of growing into peace and love of creation, which of course involves taking care of it. What do we do with things that we love? We take care of them. And that's the opportunity here. And I think it's appropriate that our tradition looks at that. And I think it's appropriate for us as a species, developmentally.
Yeah, I appreciate both of those perspectives. And I think for me, I also reflect on peace, being at peace with creation in the sense of recognizing and sitting with and beholding and being in the midst of how creation is, regardless of the ways in which human beings might like to control it or have it be different. With all that we are experiencing in light of the climate crisis, with increased devastation from storms and fires and all of this, being at peace with creation and recognizing just the creative force of all that is around us, and not necessarily saying it must be one way or the way that is most beneficial for us as human beings. So learning to live with creation in a way that is not constantly at odds with or fighting what the reality of creation is. But I love the idea of bringing peace through creation or by creation, in the sense, in my mind, what that brings up is the ways in which our experience of creation can bring peace because of the ways in which it connects us. So when I see a beautiful sunset and I share that with someone else, that element of peace being brought through the sharing of between human beings, of these stories, of these experiences, of the great blue heron I saw on Sunday before I went to church. That's what it evokes for me when I think of bringing peace through creation, is the ways in which those experiences are shared through story that then hopefully builds bridges and brings us closer together.
So, it'd be interesting to hear what you guys think about this. But, we're all where we're at, right? We're all on our spiritual journeys right now. And for me, liturgically, I feel a great responsibility around creation care in the evocation of beauty, things that create a lot of beauty liturgically. And just as if, the beauty is a reflection of praise and celebration and thanksgiving, just endless thanksgiving. And quite often I'm experiencing that and supporting that through music, selections of certain music with great choir directors. I think, the smells and bells are kind of part of ritualistically what evokes this beauty and this eternal thanksgiving. So for me, I know it's difficult in some communities, but I love having incense and I love having blessings with water, on the forehead, and people love it. There's a Celtic service that I partake in and help with, and if I'm lucky enough to be asked, and it's so beautiful because it's so embodied and it recollects us in our embodiment. And so liturgically, I think those things are really important ritualistically. And of course, we want to have pertinent and courageous preaching. I think that's really important. But I would say the most important thing is the embodiment of the ritual elements.
I appreciate that. I come from probably like the opposite church background. Like we are barefoot and on folding chairs and our altar is on wheels.
Nice.
We don't have a permanent church home. So there are no like smells and bells. We start worship at 8, but that actually means 8:15, or like when
Right.
the guy or musician shows up, and, you know, you kind of watch for his car, like, is Loea coming today or not? And like, should we wait for him or not? But where I find a lot of like liturgical kind of freedom is in the children's message that I give. I have a congregation with a lot of kids. And so doing something hands-on is always way more fun and like sticks with them a lot more than just talking about ideas. And creation is so good for that. Like I brought in some worms recently for a children's message because I was talking about this idea that like God was the psalm, I think, you turn my mourning into dancing, or beauty from ashes, or something like that. And this idea that like worms take old food and poop it out, and it actually makes dirt, right? And that is like then something that's rich that we can grow with. And who knew the worm was so much like Jesus? But I think there's really a lot of connections to be made.
Ah.
But there's so much for kids that is tangible, that is about like touching a leaf, touching a twig, like being in dirt, right? I think there's a lot of freedom around that. If there's some way to make your message or the gospel message or whatever, like find something in the reading that day that's something that especially kids can touch. It works for adults too, but we're all a little more like in our head and a little less in our bodies. And the kids of my congregation have no shame about like coming up to the front and getting their hands involved. And I think one kid tried to eat the worm. It was really exciting. So there's a lot that can be done, I think, liturgically, especially around creation, with those kinds of pockets of the service. Because I think often when we try to touch or change like our worship space, it's awesome to go outside. But if your congregation's not ready for that, it can be a whole hoopla situation and you're upsetting your senior warden, and that's kind of not worth it. But where there are pockets of like freedom, I think a children's message pocket is one of those places where you can play a little more and bring in a little more difference.
We have a community garden at my church. And so every Wednesday during the growing season, I lead a Eucharist in the garden. And
Nice.
And so the first hour and a half, we do our garden work hours. And to me, that's the liturgy of the word. That's where we're experiencing the book of creation and opening up the word through our, like you said, kind of more tactile, touching the earth, feeling the soil, speaking to the plants we're growing, telling them how excited we are for them. My favorite is there's a child who comes and he speaks so kindly to the plants. I'm going to take so good care of you. And then inevitably, those plants always grow the best. Who says, you're going to feed so many people. So it's beautiful. And then we turn to the table and I do a 30-minute Eucharist. And instead of the sermon, we walk around the garden space and pay attention to what has shifted, what's new, what's different, what can we smell, what can we taste, what can we feel, what can we hear, what can we see, to really sit in with creation at that point. And it's my favorite service, but not everyone comes, of course. It's, a midweek service. So one of the things that I've been interested in liturgically in the sanctuary at our church is around paying attention to the elements of creation we already use within our liturgy. So what are the flowers that we're using on our altar? Are they local, or are we shipping them in from another part of the country? Are they native to our context? And is there a way we can learn about what is native to our context? When we have baptisms, where's the water coming from for that baptism? Is it from a local water source? And where is the nearest local water source? And is it healthy enough for you to baptize someone? And if not, what do we do to make it healthy so that we could baptize someone in it? So looking at the elements we already use within our liturgies and thinking creatively around how might this be an opportunity for us to think more deeply with and be more in relationship with specifically our local context, and how is our local natural context already teaching us how to praise God.
We did a sermon that I still remember. We had a visitor come who was very into like creation care and caring for the planet, and he brought in like a hand grinder, and like the sermon was him bringing wheat berries, and we made the communion bread as part of the sermon. It was so cool because like you see how these little things actually become real flour, and then you add this stuff in. And he did it once when I was in college at our University Episcopal Center. And then we had him come to the Indian congregation, and we did wheat berries, but he also threw in our grain, which was monomen or wild rice. And so we put that in there, and that was so cool. There was one grandma that was kind of upset because it wasn't a sermon if we had to leave the pew. And so she was not happy that day, but everybody else got a lot out of it. And the communion wasn't a poker chip. And so she also didn't like that a whole lot, but it was fine. I said, it's really helped push us outside of our, of our boundaries. Let me shift us over to Luke. This is one of those gospels that I really appreciate because I think sometimes, who we associate with, people like to judge us about. I know, like me as the LGBT person, often if people associate with me, then the assumption is that whoever I'm talking to is also LGBT when they might not be. And I know that's happened before. What sinners are we welcoming and eating with in our time? Or maybe what sinners do we need to welcome and eat with?
This isn't necessarily like a sinner situation, but I think when I read that, the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling, it just makes me think of the sort of the welcome of children in our congregations. Like there's so much beauty in the idea of kids, right? That Jesus says, "The little children come to me," but it's so difficult to like genuinely, wholeheartedly welcome actual children who like run around and talk really loud because they don't know how to be quiet. And like actually as part of your worship service, because it changes the way that you all have to worship together. Like, I don't think it works to have kids that you're just ignoring and trying to talk over and do the same thing that you always do.
Mm.
And I think that can get tricky, right? To sort of bend the ways that we worship around the needs of the people who are actually present. And I think it shows up in a number of different kinds of congregations, but in the life of my congregation, it's often around kids. And we have lucky to have young people, which always says that we want. And yet there is a lot of grumbling because kids are not quiet and they're not still either. And they run around and we're not sort of, there's this constant battle of like, should they go to Sunday school? Which if they go, they're like going into my office and one of the teenagers is watching them, and that's fine. But I'm losing like 2/3 of my congregation when my kids walk away. And so I think, what are those ways that we are actually welcoming and sitting with, people, kids, whatever, like older, if you're a younger person, maybe it's uncomfortable to sit with an older person who like can't hear very well, right? But what I love about this idea in Luke is that like Jesus is sitting at a table with everybody. It's like he's just welcoming everybody. And I think the idea of it is one thing, but the actual practice of it can cause a lot of grumbling for most of us.
And I think for me, one of the parts that jumped out was all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And that aspect of listening, and so reflecting on who needs to listen, who needs to be listened to, who are we hearing, who are we not hearing. I think there are lots of moments in history where we think this is the most polarized time of history, and it does feel very polarizing and polarized right now. And so reflecting on who, and it's not just human beings that need to be listened to or heard. So thinking about who is listening, who is hearing, who is speaking, that was something that drew my attention, was the aspect of listening within that framework of Jesus sitting at table. They wanted to listen to Jesus and they came near. And so also then reflecting on how do we as communities make ourselves accessible or desired to be near to be listened to, and how do we create the space and the curiosity within ourselves to go near, to listen to those whom we might consider other, including creation.
I just want to share with you guys that this whole time we've been talking, there's a hummingbird at my hummingbird feeder right at the French doors in front of the redwoods here. And it feels significant for us that there's this big-hearted hummingbird right here. Yes, Shaniqua, I agree. I love this passage from Luke. Very tricky, very tricky. It reminds me of another favorite passage in John, where Jesus asks the really infirm man in Bethesda at the pool, do you want to be made well? I feel like it has the same kind of energetic resonance. And it's Jesus in this radical, from the root being countercultural.
Mm-hmm.
Countercultural. There he's sitting with tax collectors and very tricky, tricksterish, revolutionary in a way. And that's really how I hold Jesus. And, as I think about this and I think about, my work around creation care and ecocide, I think about what would be the equivalent today, right? And the equivalent might be the 8 men, billionaires, that own the equivalent wealth of half of the world's population.
Mm.
And what would it be for Jesus to sit with them? Radical idea, because he's happy to include them. And when I think about it, I would be happy to include those billionaires too. Because on our finite planet, being a billionaire or a millionaire is quite pitiable, isn't it? I mean, I know that that's not our cultural value per se, but for me and for many others who are about creation care and loving our home, the idea that there are billionaires out there is not just as a part of the problem, but it's pitiable. And so, yes, they would be invited to the table. And it reminds me a little bit. I used to, in the Bay Area, when I was studying here, I used to work for a nonprofit doing rites of passage work with disadvantaged kids and kids from about 11 through till 18. And invariably in these times that we would meet quite regularly, you would end up talking to the kids about what were their dreams for their lives and their futures. And quite often the kids would say stuff like, I want to be a millionaire, or I want to be a billionaire, or I want to be rich and famous. And this was the answer over and over again. And I would say to them, is that all? Is that all you want to do and be? And when then, we would ask, well, what's your favorite animal? And there some people, it's different animals. So I remember one particular girl, she said, well, I love polar bears. And I said, well, imagine that in your life, part of your life, you get to dedicate it to saving that species, saving a species. Where does that sit in comparison to being a millionaire or a billionaire?
Mm.
And it was like a light went off. And it's a vision of a greater insertion. It's about understanding our humanity and our relationship with creation in a way that sometimes I think, humans don't. And it's almost about imagining ourselves in an even bigger way, stepping up to being human beings in a bigger way, participating in the ecology of species. And so for me, the appeal of sitting with the naughty folks, the tax collectors, and the billionaires and millionaires. Right on. And there's hopefulness in that.
Lisa, I'm thinking about sometimes like when I wanted to create change, sometimes the best way to do that is to build a relationship with the people that disagree with you, right? Because then they start to see you as a person and you're not this evil that they see, or they start to see how the decisions that they make impact your life. And that's harder for them to look away, right? And so I think that I don't know if I would consider them, well, I guess maybe sinners and tax collectors, but I was thinking of them as what I was going to ask as the next question was like, who are the lost ones? And maybe that's just bad for me to assume that, like, of course, I'm not the lost one, right? We don't want to think of ourselves as the lost ones, but I was thinking about them. Who are the lost ones of our time?
And that's beautiful, Shaniqua. Thank you for offering that, because ecocide belongs to all of us, right? There's no us and them in this. It belongs to every one of us, and it belongs to our ancestors and their ancestors, right? We're a part of it, and that's okay. There's nothing to be afraid of in confronting that. You know, there's great hope in confronting that. And I think, I've really seriously thought about this question, certainly in terms of the economies of scale and what it is to have, our political climate and the super rich getting even richer on a finite planet. And the question being, are they invited to the even bigger table? Yes. The answer is yes. Yes. Yes.
You asked which one of us is the lost one. And I'm looking at this parable and thinking it's not so much that I'm resonating with the idea of a lost one or being lost, but with like maybe, Lisa, a little bit what you're talking about, like losing our own sense of purpose in the world. Jesus says, which one of you having 100 sheep and losing one of them does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? Me, I don't do that. Who does that? Like, Jesus is like, you all are going to do this, right? I'm like, no. Like, I have 99. I'm good. Like, I don't need to go after the one. But, and I think he says it as if it's such a no-brainer. Like, of course you're going to go after the one lost out of 100. Of course you're going to rejoice, after like searching your house for one lost coin. I'm like, I'm not looking for that coin. That coin is gone. We're saying goodbye to the 10th silver coin and we're moving on with our lives. We're calling 9 silver coins good enough. And so I'm wondering, like, not so much who are the lost sheep, but like, what have I lost inside of my own self that Jesus is going like, girl, like, you got to go looking for the one. Like, that one is important. And then can we not like leave good enough alone? And I think there is this connection to that like bigger sense of purpose, that like human being or human becoming in this way, Lisa, that you were speaking so beautifully about, right? And like stepping up to who we are called to be in the world and how we are called to be in relationship with others. And like, particularly in the example about the sheep, responsibility that we should have for creation, right? No, it's not okay that 99 species survived and you lost one. Like, that's not okay, right? We need to like go after the one that's about to be endangered. Like, we cannot even let one of God's beautiful creatures go extinct, go missing. And so I think I'm being really convicted of like my own sense of numbness to ecocide and to the losses, like the many, many, many losses of our natural world. Because, I would very often like to look at the 99, look at the 9 that are left and call it good and not stress too much about it. Or kind of throw my hands up and go like, well, there's nothing that can be done. Like, I kind of looked for that lost coin. I like moved a couch pillow. I didn't find it. It'll turn up eventually. Right? Instead of being like, this woman is like lighting the lamp, sweeping the house, searching carefully. Like, she is dedicated, right? Like, she's in it. And so I don't know, Jesus is really asking me to like be a little more invested maybe, and look at what is lost and go like, no, it's not good enough. Like, you need to keep at it, have that persistence. Yeah.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, because I keep going back and forth on, I similarly feel convicted by this. Is the human species the one that is lost? Are we the lost ones? And then how are we found? And maybe and maybe more accurately is, Western global North, within our culture and the way in which we're living our lives right now, and how that is deeply impacting the climate crisis and our progress towards healing, and also trying to find the ways to still feel and not numb, like you said, Jazzy, not get so completely overwhelmed by yet another thing, another species. And then also being aware of how many things are lost that I don't know are lost because I don't have that connection. I don't have that relationship. So reflecting on the ways in which our disconnection, not everyone, I'm saying generalizations and I don't mean to, but maybe our personal disconnection with creation can lead to a lack of awareness of who is lost or what is lost, which in turn is a lostness within us.
Right. That failure to see how we're connected to not only each other, but like creation and God and all the things, and maybe even ourselves. Sometimes we're disconnected from our own self, right?
And Shaniqua, I just wanted to offer, the interesting thing about that, because you're right on, the paradox about that is in indigenous cultures, for example, there's no, and I think we can speak broadly, there is a difference between individuality and the openness to individuality and difference, right? And thereby diversity, the individuality, versus this thing called individualism, right? These two words, the same root, but very, very different. And think about our society at the moment in terms of negations of selection around gender, for example, right? It's a rough road. That's a rough road. But, there are traditions in which individuality is embraced. The individualism of the culture, which I think is what you're speaking about, brings a whole host of other issues and problems in terms of its disconnectedness.
I'm thinking of this, as you were talking, Jazzy, I was thinking of my nieces and like the joy that children have when they found something.
Yeah. And in both of these parables, like the person who finds the sheep, the person who finds the coin calls together all the friends and neighbors, right? Like that's a really important part of and I also can't imagine doing that. Like, y'all, I found this quarter. Like what? You know what I mean? I wouldn't even call my mom, I don't know that I'd tell my wife that I found a coin that I was missing, let alone having a block party because I found, the dollar bill or whatever it is. So I think that too speaks of Anna, you've been talking a lot about local relationships and how our relationships inform the ways that we live and the ways that we consider one another, right? The ways that we grow in love and care for others. And I think that too, I'm not connected enough to my neighbors to know when one of them lost a coin or a sheep or anything, right? We maybe wave to each other when I walk my dog in the afternoon. And I think that's pretty friendly. I'm proud of myself for that wave, right? Because that's the kind of culture that we live in, and the depth of relationship to be aware of when your neighbor has lost and then found a coin is you're in it deep. You're really aware of there is not the same privacy in one's home, right? That we think of and prize so much. It makes me think there must be much more openness to know what's happening in each other's lives in this deeply, intimately connected way.
I was thinking the same thing. My nephews, also this kid in our garden, we were clearing a bed to plant some new plants. We were planting carrots and he was helping to clear the bed, but he left one plant and he said, no, this one is not ready. And we're leaving it. And he said, it's so fuzzy and I love it. And I found it and we're keeping it, and just was so excited to share what he had found. But I wonder then, is some of the lostness, that loss of innocence and awe and wonder that children bring, because you're right. When I read this thinking of a child, absolutely, they would go and search, and then they would have a massive party when they found. And that's a beautiful thing to think about in my mind, reflecting on that childhood joy and exuberance and presence just always in that moment. It's really quite beautiful.
It's an ever invitation. And I just wonder, if we could take, Shaniqua, your story. I mean, let's imagine what that might be like if we could do that politically, on a political stage right now, in this time of deep polemics, right? You're invited. We're all included. Come and sit with us at the table, and I think that's the invitation here. In this passage, I think that's the invitation, and it's Jesus as ecologist, he's the primordial ecologist.
It's hard for me to think of one. It feels as though there are so many ways this could be answered. And I think for me, one of the things I reflect on is kind of what you were talking about, Jazzy, with the numbing and the tamping feelings down, or trying to numb, keep ourselves from feeling any of the feelings that come with all of the things that are happening right now. And one of the things I'm reflecting on is this will come out about 10 days before the anniversary of Hurricane Helene, which hit my area, my region. And so reflecting on, as that anniversary comes of this devastating hurricane and all that it brought and still brings, we will be in recovery for a long time. Just reflecting on the ways in which we can, in those moments of despair, try and block ourselves from feeling the hard times or being near the hard times. And so what I appreciate about Jeremiah is that Jeremiah is the weeping prophet. And I'm mindful of Joanna Macy, who just recently passed away, and the honoring of the pain of the world and the not shying away from the feelings of despair, and actually the imperative that we do feel despair. Because if we don't touch it, we can't move through the emotion to come to the other side, where we see the world with new eyes, and we come to recognize how deeply interconnected we already are. And that the fact that I feel that pain shows me how deeply connected I am to you and to the world and to each other. And so we need that. And if we don't tap into that, then any of the solutions we try to come up with will not meet the issues we're dealing with, because we're avoiding a huge part of where the problem lies, which I think is in our not allowing ourselves to feel how deeply painful and despairing it can be. And that's not to say to get stuck in or lost in the despair, but if we avoid it so completely, then I don't know how we come through.
That reminded me of CPE and where I learned I was a Hufflepuff. And so for those of you who know Harry Potter, the Hufflepuffs are when you come in and you're talking to somebody, and my goal was always just I need to make them laugh, and then everything's going to be fine. We'll say a prayer and I'll be out. And sometimes I went into somebody's room and I was like, how's it going? And he's like, I'm going home tomorrow. I was like, oh, that's great. What great news. And so I'm trying to focus on the positive. And he's like, actually, I'm going home to die because I just found out I have this terminal cancer and I'm going to get put on home hospice. And I was like, oh. And then I tried to tell a joke, which this is one of those things that you learn about yourself, right? And so I learned, don't be Hufflepuff. I had to sit with them through that lament and help them. Sometimes that's what you're called to do, is be present in that mess. And making them laugh is about me, not about them. And I needed to remember that. That was a big, powerful learning.
Yeah, I have compassion for it, though. There's a lot of fear around what's coming and what's here, right? I get it. And so that fear causes us to deny, to be in denial. And this is why at the top of the conversation, I was talking about, confronting who we've been, who we are to this planet. It's all right, it's all right. There's no need to be afraid. It's painful, but it's a developmental requirement for us as a species. And, the other thing to think about in terms of grieving and public grieving, which I think is a necessity, is in a hyper-rationalized society. I mean, let's just think about AI at the moment. Grief allows us to be irrational together. It's permission for us to be irrational together. And that's really, I think it's really important, and the lament is important, right? Like Joanna said, Joanna was one of my teachers, we don't grieve for what we don't love, right? We grieve for what we love. And for me at the moment, I'm quite afraid about the Gulf Stream, for example. There's lots of conversations around what's happening with the Gulf Stream and what might happen, if the Gulf Stream slows down, which it looks like it's happening, or stops completely. That's fearful. My friends in Spain or, Portugal right now and France, I don't know whether you're hearing, but, the temperatures there are reaching like 115 degrees. 115 degrees. And it's blisteringly terrifying, literally. And so the lament becomes necessary for the healing, right? It becomes, like Anna was just saying, it becomes necessary for the healing. And I see this as a collective social project, not just as an individual project.
Yeah. I think you're both spot on about feeling despair and feeling grief. That is so beautiful. We don't grieve for what we don't love. That's true. I also think, on the opposite side, I think it is hard. Not a hard time that is coming, but it is hard for me sometimes to hold on, not to despair, but to joy, right? It's easier sometimes to feel the lament and the despair and the fear and the grief. And I think it is such an act of resistance, maybe not so much individually, but certainly collectively, to hold on to that which is deeply good and joyful and be no, I continue to choose to see good. And I continue to, not just sort of be pulled into the news cycle. I can spend so long reading the news and I'm reading the same thing, right? Nothing changed. But because we're on this 24-hour cycle, you're reading the same thing, but it's reported by your local news station and then the New York Times and then whatever else you're getting, the Washington Post, but it's the same information. Nothing changed. And for me to keep that right size so that I can not be looking at my phone, but be present to my kids and be in my own home and in my own life and wave to my neighbors when I'm walking my dog, right? That is a hard thing, but I think really necessary to my survival for sure. But I think collectively to our survival through all of the difficult stuff that we don't have control over or feel very powerless in the face of, to remember those things which we do have control over. Right. And those ways in which I'm not entirely sure how to feed the starving children in Gaza, but I know that I can take mango from my yard and share it with my neighbor. Right. I know that I can feed the kids next door. And maybe that doesn't feel as big or as earth shattering right now, but it's what I can do. And I think that kind of that the balance or the rhythm of those two things, the grieving and the despair and the allowing ourselves to feel that and not being numb to that. Yes. And also when we are numb to that, I think we are also numb to joy, numbing. We don't get to go, okay, I numb just this bit, right? Mm. Anesthesia is it works as a whole. And so just refusing to anesthetize myself or to be anesthetized is a hard thing that is worthy of every effort.
Amen.
So God tells Jeremiah that the hot wind is too strong to winnow or cleanse. And that kind of made me feel some kind of way about it, right? Because sometimes they'll talk about this, this bad stuff that's coming, like some of the like hellfire and brimstone kind of messages were like, oh, but it's going to winnow or it's going to cleanse and you can use that. But if this is too hot to winnow, what does that mean to you? How did you guys read that?
I mean, I actually find that quite helpful. Like, not everything is doing God's purpose. There's so much like really challenging theology that people hold that's this sort of like, God doesn't give you more than you can handle, or like, there's got to be a reason for my suffering. And sometimes I'm like, no, suffering is suffering. Like, cancer is cancer. It's great if you're like learning a lesson or growing close to God. And also, like, God did not give you that tumor. Like, I just do not believe that that is something that God did to like winnow you or like put you in a refining fire. Like, I don't, because that to me has no grace in it. And so I don't think that can be from God. So I don't think God's saying like this hot wind can't teach you anything, or like you can't learn anything from it, or like maybe there are still lessons to be understood, but I find it quite helpful to remember and to be reminded, like, yes, God can use all things, and God does not like make all things to happen. Some things are happening and they have nothing to do with God's will for us. They have everything to do with like our own corruption and evil and sinfulness individually and collectively.
This is a tough passage, and hard times, they're coming in terms of what's happening with climate thresholds and so on and so forth. We're in trouble here. We're in trouble. And I think that's a reality. But it's not the end of the story. I think the question then becomes, who are we in that? Who are we in that lament? Who are we in that horror? Who might we become? What opportunity does that present to us? Can we shine? Can we love? Can we hold on? Can we feed our neighbors? Can we serve beauty? Can we become beautiful? Can we become human? I think that's the question. I mean, you see, the great giveaway now is the word thing I like to call it, is so many of us are participating in love of each other, love of the planet. We're really trying, all right? And we're doing that despite knowing what the outcome's going to be. We're doing it despite knowing whether or not we will be successful. And that's what makes it the great giveaway, right? We do it without knowing what the outcomes are. So who are we in the face of what Jeremiah is describing? Well, we're in that moment now. And it's not like it's a test. It's more like this thing is so gorgeous and awesome and magical. Are we going to be able to find our place there in our love of it?
Yeah, I struggle a lot with this because, it talks about God's judgment, and this is a hot wind coming from me, but it also says toward my poor people. And so holding all of that and recognizing that, at least where I sit today in this passage, is recognizing that what we are currently experiencing is the result of decisions and actions that human species has been making. And these are the results of that. So recognizing that it is playing out the way it plays out because of the choices we have made, which also frees us up, though, to make different choices. And that's the hope, right? That we somehow collectively decide, and maybe that's the call more specifically in these individualism spaces, to follow the gospel and be different from that, and to push our people who have power to make the other choices. Because, the climate crisis is going to continue in the direction it's going until we shift. Whether or not we shift soon enough is still to be seen, but there is choice in it. And so trying to find the ways in which I can be participating in the movement towards a shift is my hope. But I think part of what I'm noticing is more and more people in my context are hearing scripture differently now because of the experiences we are having because of the climate crisis. I live in the mountains, and until about 5 years ago, you didn't need air conditioning here ever. And now we get hot summers, and that was not a reality. And now growing seasons are shifting, and we're having to learn different ways of planting and harvesting and when the rain comes or doesn't come. And so it's all a learning that we're having to participate in. But it comes down to the choices that we make and what are the ones that I have some semblance of agency around. And so figuring out, where do I have agency? Where do I have some power? Where is my voice needed or helpful? Where do I need to be listening, and who do I need to be listening to? And how do we move? How do we move from there?
So what tips do you have for preaching proper 19? Mine that I would add is just this idea. I've never thought about the idea of giving up on the one. Like, Jazzy, I love that you said that, because my brain does go there, but I've never heard that sermon preached before. And so I think that might be the sermon to talk about, and then talk about the kid and finding the stuffy. I think that would be maybe my idea, but well, it's your idea, but what I would say would be for preaching on it, my tip for preaching on it.
I think you could do a lot of fun children's messages with like scavenger hunts, or telling somebody to hide coins around the church and having the kids look to find them or something like that, experiencing that like joy in finding, especially if it's coins, because kids, I don't care how small they are, they all know the value of a coin. You know, they all want the clanging in their pockets. So yeah, I think there could be something really fun with like hunting and finding, and like the experience of what that is to come across something that you didn't know you were missing, maybe.
Yeah, I'm sitting with the joy of finding moment, and that story you shared, Shaniqua, just that because I can see it so clearly in my mind. It's just such, and also viscerally, I can feel when I think about that story, I can feel the excitement and the joy and maybe even some gratitude in the sharing. And so that really struck me as well.
Yeah. I mean, you know, one of my favorite writers is a guy called Abraham Heschel. I don't know whether you've read him. He walked with Dr. King, and I first read his books when I was at seminary, and I remember, you know, have you ever had these experiences where you read a book and you start to, I was laying down, as I remember, and I started gasping. I couldn't breathe because I was so moved by what I was reading, and it was Heschel I was reading. And he talks about the imperative of awe. The imperative of awe. And he's quite right. You know, I mean, what's brought us to life when we think about it, you know, through our scientific lens and cosmologically, it's just amazement. It's amazement how we're all interconnected and what we're made of and what we belong to, this grandeur and that we belong to. It's amazing. And no one can take any of that away from us. We all interconnected, and we belong to each other, and we're all made of the same substances. You know, I mean, I could talk to you about, you know, proteins in our bellies that we have from the time of the first Big Bang, or, you know, we walk because of things that we developed 500 million years ago, or having in our eyes what we still have of ocean, you know, in our tears. I mean, it's just exquisite. It's awesome. And this is where we are. And that's what we belong to. And that's our planet. And that's each other. And in terms of creation care, I think that's what I would talk about. Just, we're beautiful. And it's not a problem. The opportunity, it's not even a challenge. The opportunity for the moment is, can we step up into that beauty and be beautiful as what we belong to?
I think I would add one more thing, and that would be, if you're in a congregation that's experienced a lot of loss, maybe preach about the Jeremiah and talk about lament and talk about kind of what Jazzy said, where it was like, God didn't send this to you, you know, like in that way, like crap happens.
Yeah. Then I was like, I don't know if I can say that on the podcast.
All right. Thank you so much for being guests. I have learned a lot from all of you today, and I know our listeners love it too. I really appreciate you all. If you want to learn more about Beloved Community, visit episcopalchurch.org/beloved-community. If you want to learn more about creation care, visit episcopalchurch.org/creation-care. Thanks to our guests, Jazzy, Lisa, and Anna. Thanks also to our production team, especially Chris, Olivia, and Mike. If you felt lost but now feel found, please rate, review, and of course, share our podcast. Until next time, let your light shine.